I was a young bloke, like a lot of young blokes. I faffed around a bit with the martial arts. Took myself off to a ninja school once, just once. Oh, there's some boys who weren't getting laid, let me tell you. Getting around in their spanky black pyjamas, throwing pretend smoke bombs with the noise. Had to be pretend, because council health and safety regulations didn't allow them to use real smoke bombs in the dojo. And it's probably better, because if you think about it, if the dojo was full of smoke, people would have got hit with the ninja throwing stars, and if they'd been practicing dripping poison into people's mouths down fishing lines, they might not have got the right guy. Did a little bit of judo when I was a kid. My parents sent me to judo because I was kind of a weedy, asthmatic child. They thought maybe it would bulk me up a little bit and help me breathe. And it did help with the breathing, but I was a weedy, asthmatic child and didn't like being thrown around on the mat, so eventually I threw a tantrum and didn't go anymore. I returned to it in my early 20s, or returned to the dojo in my early 20s. I didn't go back to judo. I started training another martial art, a much older one called jiu-jitsu, which is where judo came from. And I liked it. I liked it a lot more than judo because I was an idiot. The thing about judo, it's a sport. It's very soft. It was developed by a very wise man called Jigoro Kano, who wanted to take the violence and the anger out of society, and so he took it out of the old martial arts. So, you throw somebody in judo, you help them, they're helping you. Like they hit the mat, it's all nice. You throw somebody in jiu-jitsu and, their arm is going to break in 3 places on the way down, and then when they hit the ground, the real fun starts. Full of machismo and testosterone and stupidity, that really appealed to me, and it still does, actually. It still appeals to me because, although I'm a little older, more grizzled, I have a 10-year-old daughter that I have recently begun to teach jiu-jitsu. And it's my hope that when Anna leaves home and begins to date in 30 or 40 years, should something go wrong on that date, should some bastard put his hand on her knee, for instance, she will snap that hand off at the wrist, beat him to death with it. Not all martial arts are like this. Some of them are actually very, very gentle. One of the most gentle, one of the most intriguing is a fighting art called Aikido, developed by a man called Ueshiba. He is very, very interested in the idea of harmony. Aikido, there's no actual Japanese word. Aikido means way, and to study the way of something means to sort of attempt to understand the spirit of it. Aiki sort of means harmony or harmonious. It's not a word which is actually used outside the Aikido dojo very much. So Aikido is the way of studying harmony, or the way of studying harmonious spirits. A friend of mine studied it. He was very good. When I knew him, he was Aikido Shohan. He was black belt. He's probably, I haven't seen him for many years, he's probably Shihan now, a master. And those of us who used to do the silly, brutal fighting arts with the pretend smoke bombs and the throwing stars, we were constantly picking on him. Not properly picking on him because he'd destroy us, but we pick on his martial art because it wasn't really tough. And he would laugh at us. He had studied this art for a year in Japan to begin with, and then he'd come back and studied a lot more here. And it had saved his life, which is the story I will actually now get to. But it didn't save it in the way that you would imagine, he didn't beat down 20 dudes who were coming at him, with smoke bombs and throwing stars. He took himself off to Japan because he's kind of a hippie. Not a trad hippie with the big hair and everything. He actually had very nice hair and he wore shoes. But, he was into that whole harmony thing, which, so he was in his heart a hippie. He went off to Japan and he studied at the dojo. He didn't live inside, he lived just outside, and he needed to live just outside because it wasn't like studying a martial art here. There'll be a few of you who've done it here. There's blokes in the audience, probably most of you, have done it at one point or another for a week or two. You'll turn up for an hour or so, and in that hour you'll do a few break falls, you'll sort of, roll it around, throw some ninja stars, some pretend smoke bombs, half a dozen things, and then you go home, have some beers. It's not how it happened for Pete in Japan. He would have to come in at about 5 o'clock in the morning and make breakfast for the senior students and the masters, and then clean up the breakfast, and then he would clean up the dojo. He would sort of mop the floors and dust down the tatami, and he worked for about 4 or 5 hours before they got onto the mat. And then when they finally got onto the mat, there was no, smoke bombs or throwing stars. They would do their break falls, and they'd do those break falls over and over and over and over. Should I keep going? Because they did them for about 4 hours. And not just all the break falls, but one. Back break fall, for instance. There's lots and lots of throws in judo, jiu-jitsu, aikido, where you end up on your back. And if you don't want to smash your head in, you don't want a broken spine, you need to know how to get down there without hurting yourself. When we practice it here, we'll do it for 2 or 3 minutes. These guys did it for 4 hours. They practiced the back break fall to the point where as they rolled over their shoulders, they did it so many times that the skin and the meat began to abrade from their bodies, and they ended up with massive calloused scabs to the point where they couldn't do that anymore, so they'd have to do something else. Kneeling practice, for instance. You think you know how to kneel? I think you're pretty good at kneeling, hey? Yeah. I know some kneeling moves, mate. But nothing like Pete, because Pete practiced kneeling for hours and hours and hours at a time, to the point where all of the flesh came off his kneecaps, and they would start each day in the dojo with the sound of their knees cracking open as they got down to do some more kneeling practice. This went on and on for weeks and then months, and eventually they began to do some technique. He was there for a long time, and he learned a lot of technique. Not all of it was physical. One of the things he had to learn was a sort of weird state of mind, and all of that punishment, all of that diabolical pain and self-abnegation was part of that learning process. He had to sort of break down the subject-object division between mind and body, and he had to understand that in this art, the mind and the body are the same thing, and eventually you hopefully get to a point where actually the description of it is mind, no mind. You are there, you are conscious, but you're sort of not. It's kind of like the Force in Star Wars or something. So he's done this for about a year, and, being a hippie, it's time to move on. He actually had one of those tickets, you just sort of take it around the world. He was supposed to go to London, and he wanted to go via India, hippie. He does a couple of days there and eats some leaves and twig. It's time to move on. He ends up in a regional airport, and it's chaos. It's chaos and madness in the way that only Indian regional airports can do chaos and madness. It doesn't bother Pete. This is a guy who has spent so long on his knees the last year or so, the skin has worn off them. So he just gets himself into his mind, no mind frame of mind, and he just sits there surrounded by the chaos. It is just swelling, and it just goes on. It goes on not for days, but he was there for at least 9 or 10 hours, he told us, trying to maintain this state of mind, no mind. There were families complaining, there were kids going off. Anybody who's been trapped in an airport with kids for more than a couple of hours will know what it was like. Pete's just letting it wash over him. Mind, no mind. And then a man came walking through. He was some kind of official. It was nothing other than, a clipboard which told anybody he was an official. But Pete saw this guy, He had no intention of doing anything, but for some reason he was suddenly found himself, he was up off the floor where he had been kneeling. He was just projecting himself through the chaos and madness of this airport, and suddenly he was standing in front of this man. He had no idea why he was doing this, but he was just begging him, get me out of this airport. I know you cannot get me onto this flight. I know you cannot speed it up. I don't need an alternative flight. Just get me to another airport. I need to get out of this airport. The guy, I don't know whether he did some kind of Jedi mind trick that the Aikido guys aren't telling us about, but the guy with the clipboard, who had given nobody else any joy all day, said to Pete, come with me. And he put him on another flight which flew out to some other wretched little regional airport where he sat for more hours and caught another flight, and eventually he ended up in London about 48 hours later on. He had to go to a friend's place. The friend was away. Pete, you can have my spot. Took his key from under the mat on the front door, let himself in, collapses onto the bed, falls asleep. He's asleep for 22 hours. When he wakes up, the phone with the answering machine beside the bed is just flashing. It's like flashing, there's 20 messages there or something. He hadn't heard it, he had been that wiped out. He starts picking up the messages, they're all for him, they're his friends. Pete, where are you? You're not here, we're very worried, Pete, very, very worried about you. And he's just saying, get a life, And these calls just got increasingly frantic as he went through. By about the 9th or 10th call, he just gave up and decided to call one of these people back. It was some old girlfriend from campus. And she screamed on the line when he got on and said, hi, it's me, Pete, what's going on? Big scream. She was round about 15 minutes later on, comes through the door, and in that funny way, she's like both hitting him and trying to hug him at the same time. He's, calm down, what's going on? Just tears streaming down her face. Why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you tell us you were back? And so I was tired, hitting. She was hitting with a newspaper. Her state of mind was finally explained when she calmed down and she showed him the newspaper. And the flight he had supposed to have been on had not made it very far out of that airport. It had gone down over the mountains, slammed into the side of one, and there were no survivors. And to this day, Pete is convinced that had he not had that year of brutal training, of getting out of himself and then going into it and putting his mind into a completely different place, he would not have launched himself across the floor of that airport. He would not have spoken to that guy in the way he did, and he would not be alive today. And I'm inclined to believe him. Thank you.